What if the boy who became king never became a monster? What if the North raised the lion cub? And what if it broke the wolf in the process? Imagine this. Robert Baratheon dies on that cursed hunt just as he did in the original timeline. But this time, Ned never confronts Cersei with the truth about her children's blood. No letter, no accusation, no threat. He makes a choice, a single world-shifting decision. He looks into Joffrey's eyes and sees something, not Lannister gold, but the frightened fire of a child who's never known honor. And Ned chooses to protect him, not out of love for Cersei, not even out of loyalty to Robert, but for the sake of peace, for the realm, for his daughters, for the soul of a child who might still be saved. And so instead of claiming the Iron Throne for Stannis, instead of dying in the dungeons of the Red Keep, Lord Ned Stark takes the boy king under his wing. He claims under oath before the small council that Joffrey is Robert's true-born son. He kneels, he bows, he guides, and Joffrey becomes a Stark in all but name. But here's where it gets insane. The moment Ned makes that choice, he rewrites the destiny of Westeros. Joffrey Baratheon, raised by a man who believes in honor more than breath, begins to change, slowly, reluctantly, but not without scars. At first, the boy resists. He sneers, he insults. He calls Jon Snow bastard behind closed doors. He mocks Arya for swinging sticks like a boy. He slaps Sansa when she disagrees with him in court, and Ned's hand closes around his wrist like winter steel. "You will never raise your hand in anger again," Ned says. Then, for the first time, someone holds Joffrey accountable. The boy glares, then trembles, then nods, but Joffrey isn't the only one breaking. Ned is changing too. He's forced to play the game now, truly play it. His values are compromised. He lies to the realm. He protects the child of Jaime Lannister and Cersei. And each time Joffrey makes a mistake, each time he lashes out or demands cruelty, Ned is forced to decide, punish the king or guide the boy, and guiding the boy slowly eats at the man. Arya notices it first. Her father's face doesn't hold warmth like before. There's always tension behind his eyes, like he's waiting for a blade in his back. She hates Joffrey more than ever. Even when the boy tries to act noble, she sees the cruelty waiting to erupt. She trains harder. She dreams of Needle. She dreams of running Sansa, though. She begins to believe. Her golden prince softens in Winterfell's cold. He learns to ride with the guards. He watches Robb train. He speaks to Maester Luwin, asking about old Nan's stories. He listens to Lord Stark at council meetings. And when he laughs, truly laughs, Sansa starts to think maybe he was just misunderstood in King's Landing. Maybe the North is making him better. But wait, here's where it gets wild. Cersei Lannister doesn't forget. And she doesn't forgive. She watches from the Red Keep as her son slips away piece by piece into the Stark mold. She can't stand the idea of her child calling another man father in all but name. So she begins plotting not war, not open rebellion. Something colder, letters, gold, whispers in the dark. She tries to turn the other children, Myrcella and Tommen, against Joffrey. She sends envoys to Littlefinger. She speaks to Varys. She stirs Tywin Lannister into motion. But Ned, he knows she's coming. And now he's not the honorable fool who refused to play the game. He's learned. He watches every raven. He counters every scheme. He keeps Sansa close, Arya even closer, and never lets Joffrey out of his sight. Even when Joffrey kneels in the Godswood, asking the old gods for strength to be a better ruler. Even when he apologizes to Arya clumsily for what happened with Mycah. Even when he starts calling Jon Snow brother. Especially then, because Ned knows what blood runs in Joffrey's veins. And he knows what blood has already been spilled because of it. Now stop. Did you feel that? That chill in your spine? Because just as Ned starts to believe, just as he starts to think maybe, just maybe, Joffrey could become something more than the twisted king he was meant to be. The raven arrives, King's Landing burns. Not from dragons. Not from wildfire. From betrayal. Littlefinger has flipped the board. While Ned was busy shaping the boy, Peter Baelish was shaping the realm. Whisper by whisper, coin by coin, Renly Baratheon declares himself king. Stannis lands in the Stormlands. Tywin raises an army and demands his grandson back. No Stark shall wear the crown, he spits. And in the middle of it all, Joffrey, no longer a Lannister, not quite a Stark, a king without a kingdom. And Ned, Torn between a realm he betrayed and a son who was never truly his. Okay, take a breath. This is just the beginning. Because what happens next? Breaks Westeros in half. Breaks Westeros in half. 3 days after the Raven came, Winterfell was no longer a home. It was a fortress. Maester Luwin read the letter twice before handing it to Ned, and even then, his hands trembled. It wasn't just the words written in ink. It was the message beneath them. Renly had marched on King's Landing. Stannis was gathering ships at Dragonstone, and Tywin, Lannister demanded one thing, the return of his grandson, Joffrey Baratheon, to Casterly Rock, or war. Ned didn't speak for a long time after reading it. He simply stood at the head of the table in the great hall, his eyes fixed on the candlelight. Jaw clenched so tightly his neck pulsed. Robb stood beside him, tense and waiting. "I should have sent him back the day I brought him here," Ned finally said. "You didn't," Robb replied, "because you thought he could be better." And Joffrey was trying, but try doesn't erase blood. He walked the halls of Winterfell in silence now, no longer boasting or barking orders at servants. He trained with the guards under Ser Roderick, bruised and breathless. He sat beside Ned at council meetings and listened, actually listened, to matters of grain and bannermen and border disputes. And yet, no matter how hard he worked, how many apologies he stammered, how polite he became. People looked at him and still saw a lion with a crown, he heard them whisper. He's the incest boy. He's the monster king. He's the reason the butcher's son died. And worst of all, he heard Arya laugh when someone said it. So one night, long after the halls went quiet, he stood outside her room. Hand raised, ready to knock or shout, or scream, but he didn't. He just turned and walked into the snow. Okay, now pause here for a second, because what happens next? You're not ready for it. The raven that arrived the next morning wasn't from King's Landing. It was from the wall from Lord Commander Jeor Mormont. And it wasn't addressed to Ned Stark, it was addressed to Jon Snow. The parchment was sealed in black wax. Inside 7 words, Benjen missing, wildlings stirring, white shadows seen. Ned's heart dropped. He had told Jon he'd explain everything about his mother the next time they spoke. But that time never came. Now winter was crawling down from the north, and his brother was missing. And the Night's Watch, Westeros's last line of defense, was sending letters to Jon, not the Lord of Winterfell. Because maybe, just maybe, they knew the truth too. But before Ned could act, another raven came. This one wasn't inked. It was soaked in blood, sent from a scout. Riding ahead of Tywin's forces, Lannister banners were flying. Near the neck, they weren't requesting parley. They were coming for Joffrey. Now here's where things get crazy. Ned gathered his bannermen. He sent ravens to the Umbers, the Karstarks, the Manderleys. He told them a war was coming, but not for the crown, not for glory, for something worse, to protect a boy I once swore to kill, and they came. Not all of them. But enough to hold Winterfell. For a while, but Catelyn, she was furious. "You lied to the realm for him," she said, pacing in the solar. "You brought him here. You risked everything." "I did," Ned admitted, "and for what? So he can sit at our table like a son. So my daughters can befriend the child of Cersei Lannister. I did it to stop a war." Her laugh was cold. "And now it's come anyway." He couldn't argue. He wouldn't, because deep down Ned knew. The moment he lied for Joffrey. He'd invited all of this, and now thousands would die for it. Now let's zoom in on Joffrey. Because while lords and banners gathered, while ravens flew and blades were sharpened, he was sitting in the crypts, alone. He knelt before Lyanna Stark's tomb, fingers shaking. "I didn't want to be king," he whispered. No one answered. "I didn't even like my mother." "Not really. She made me hurt people. Told me it was the only way to be strong. Told me my father was a drunken fool." But he laughed. He laughed like I never could. He touched the cold stone. "I don't know who I am anymore." Behind him, footsteps, Jon Snow. He didn't speak. Just stood there, eyes wary. "What do you want?" Joffrey asked, not turning around. Jon's voice was flat. "Why are you here?" "To remember," Joffrey said. Jon moved closer. "You never knew her." "I know," Joffrey whispered. "But she loved Rhaegar. And the realm burned because of it. Just like it's burning because of me." Jon watched him carefully. "What if I gave it up?" Joffrey said. "The crown. The name, everything. What if I ran?" Jon shook his head. "You'd be hunted. I already am." That moment right there broke something because Jon saw it. The hollow look. The regret. The truth. And for the first time since arriving in Winterfell, Jon didn't call him a bastard. Didn't call him a monster. He said one word. Stay. Wait, what? Jon Snow telling Joffrey to stay, to fight. You better believe it happened. Because Jon knew if this boy ran, the realm would chase him to the ends of the earth. But if he stood his ground, he might earn his redemption. Back in the Great Hall, Ned stood before the map of the North. Tywin would be there in days. Renly was in the capital. Stannis was crossing the sea. And Daenerys Targaryen. Well, her dragons had just hatched across the sea. And Ned, he had one son by blood, one by honor and one by lies, and all of them would have to stand together. Or fall alone. The war hadn't started yet, but the wolves were already bleeding. The snow was falling heavier now. Not the soft, swirling flakes of a northern morning, but the hard, slanted kind that came with the wind screaming across the moors. The kind that covered blood before it cooled. The kind that smelled like war. Robb Stark stood at the top of the battlements, eyes narrowed against the wind, watching the tree line far beyond the walls. Somewhere past those hills, Tywin Lannister's host was moving. 10,000 men, gold cloaks, siege weapons, and the lion's fury. He turned as footsteps approached. Ned, wrapped in a heavy black cloak, face lined with more than just frost. "They're days away," Robb said. Ned nodded. 2 if the snow slows them. 1 if it doesn't. Robb's jaw tightened. "We can't win this fight." "No," Ned admitted. "But we can survive it." That was the truth he'd been carrying like a stone in his chest. They weren't preparing for a victory. They were preparing for an escape, a delay, a sacrifice if it came to that. But Robb didn't know the worst part yet. Ned had already decided who he'd save and who he wouldn't. Now wait, this next moment, it's going to hit you in the gut. Because while the Starks were bracing for war, Cersei Lannister was unleashing a storm of her wrath. She didn't sit idly in the Red Keep. She wasn't mourning her son's rebellion. She was building a new weapon. She made a deal with the one man Westeros should have never trusted, Peter Baelish. He promised her something more powerful than an army, more dangerous than wildfire, chaos. He whispered to the Tyrells that Joffrey had been taken hostage. He bribed the Iron Bank to freeze Stark funds. He even reached out to Varys, hinting that perhaps a Lannister child might meet a tragic fate in the North, all of it designed to fracture the North from within, and it worked, because that very night, one of Ned's bannermen, a Karstark, tried to poison Joffrey's wine. It failed. Barely. The boy was sick for hours. Arya found the servant sobbing in the snow, bleeding from the mouth, eyes rolled back, and when Joffrey woke, pale and shaking, he whispered only one thing: "They'll never see me as one of you." Now here's the wild part. Instead of retreating, instead of hiding, Joffrey asked to speak to the bannerman. Yes, Joffrey Baratheon, former king, Lannister heir, once a boy who watched a butcher's son die for fun, stood in the great hall of Winterfell, still pale from the poison, and faced them all. The Manderleys, the Umbers, the Glovers, even the men who hated him most. He stood beside Jon Snow, not behind, not in front, beside, and he spoke. "I know what you think I am," he said, voice hoarse. "I've thought it too. I've lived it. I've worn a crown and acted the fool. I've done terrible things, things I can't undo. But Lord Stark took me in. He gave me what no one else ever did. A chance." He turned to Ned, then back to the men. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for time. Time to prove that I can be more than my name, more than my blood. I'm not your king. I'm not your enemy. I just want to fight for the place that showed me mercy." There was silence, thick, suffocating silence. Then someone spat at the ground. "You're a Lannister. Always will be," a man growled. But no one drew a blade, and that was something. Okay, pause again. Because just as the North begins to fracture under the weight of politics, family, and old blood, something impossible happens. A raven arrives from beyond the wall. This one wasn't from Castle Black. It was wild, scratched, blood-smeared. And the message? 6 words burned into the hide with charcoal. "Winter has come. The dead walk." Jon's face went pale. Ned stared at the message and felt something cold in his bones. Not fear, but recognition. As if part of him had been waiting for this, for the stories of old Nan to breathe again. "Send riders," he said, "to every house." "Every holdfast," Robb frowned. "What do we say?" "The truth," Ned said. "The long night has begun, but no one was ready, because Tywin Lannister wasn't slowing down. He wasn't rallying to the realm. He was coming, swords drawn, banners high, and he didn't care about White Walkers or Whites, or whispers from the north. He wanted Joffrey. Ned called a war council that night. Robb, Jon, the bannermen, Maester Lewin, even Theon and Joffrey. "We have two enemies now," Ned said. "The one at our gates, and the one beyond the wall." Robb slammed his fist on the table. "So what do we do? Split our men?" "No," Jon said. "We send a message." They all looked at him. "To Tywin," Jon continued, "and to the realm, that the north is not divided, that Joffrey is ours, that he bleeds with us, fights with us, dies with us if it comes to that." Everyone stared, even Ned, even Joffrey, and the boy king nodded. "I'll ride out with the vanguard," he said. "Let the old lion see for himself." "You'll die," Theon said, scoffing. "Maybe," Joffrey said, "but better here with a sword in my hand than running back to a mother who only wants to use me." And that right there, that's when the north began to shift. Not for Joffrey, but because of him. Because if a Lannister was willing to die for the Starks, maybe the realm wasn't as broken as it seemed. But then, right at that fragile moment of unity, another raven arrived. This one came from Dragonstone, signed by Stannis Baratheon. He claimed the throne. He named Joffrey a false king, a bastard born of incest. He named Ned Stark a traitor for hiding the truth. He demanded the North bend the knee or be burned, and worst of all, he had Melisandre now, and the Red Priestess had seen flames rising in the snowblood, wolves, lions, fire, everything was about to ignite. Now it was no longer about right or wrong, it was survival, and the first to fall would be the one who blinked. Would be the one who blinked. They rode out at dawn. Joffrey's cloak was Stark grey, not Lannister crimson. His sigil, if you could call it that, was a blank field. No lion, no crown, just steel and leather and cold breath. He wasn't leading the vanguard. That honor still belonged to Robb, but he rode near the front, sword at his side, helmet under his arm, eyes set toward the tree line where Tywin's army waited. He had never been colder in his life, not because of the weather, but because this was the first time he was going to kill for someone else, and maybe die for them. Jon rode beside him, quiet, but not unfriendly. Just watchful, always watchful. The other soldiers gave Joffrey space, like he carried some disease they didn't want to catch. But they didn't insult him, not anymore, because today he wasn't the boy who ordered Ned Stark's head. He was the boy who'd chosen to fight beside him, behind them. Ned stood on the ramparts, watching his sons, all of them, ride toward battle. And it struck him that this was what his father must have felt. Before the Tower of Joy, before the Trident, before everything bled, he wasn't sending sons into glory, he was sending them into death, should we pray, my lord? Maester Lewin asked softly. Ned didn't look away. They already did. When they stayed. Now here's where it gets brutal. The first clash came just past midday. Tywin's army didn't charge immediately. They let the snow work in their favor. Let it blind the northern archers. Let it cover the pits and traps Robb had ordered. Then, like shadows breaking through mist, the gold banners crept forward, not roaring, not shouting, marching, and when the horns blew, gods, the sound was like thunder cracking the sky. The clash began. Robb met them head-on, blade flashing, grey wind howling through the snowstorm like a ghost. The northern cavalry surged forward, screaming their fury. Joffrey didn't hesitate, he followed, and for the first time in his life, he earned something, a cut across the arm, a slash along the jaw. His blade struck a knight's shield and jarred his whole body. He killed one man, maybe two, he wasn't sure. It didn't feel like victory. Dad felt like drowning in noise and blood and heat, and yet he didn't run, he didn't cry, he fought. Back in Winterfell, Arya watched from the tallest tower, fingers white around the hilt of needle. "Stupid," she whispered. "They're all stupid." Sansa stood beside her, silent, eyes shining. "Why are you here?" Arya asked. "I wanted to watch him die," Sansa said. Arya turned, surprised. "But now," Sansa whispered, "I'm afraid he won't." Now pause, because right when the North starts to believe maybe, just maybe, they could hold the line, Tywin Lannister plays his first real card. He doesn't want to win the battle. He wants to break them, and so as the Starks hold the field, another force flanks them from the south, led not by a soldier but by Cersei Lannister. Yes, you heard that right. The Queen Mother herself rode north in secret, backed by sellswords and traitors bought with gold and fear. She didn't come to negotiate. She came to end it herself, her target. Not Joffrey, not Ned, not Robb, Bran, Winterfell's last true-born son, because if she couldn't have her own child back, she'd burn the North's. Okay, take a breath. Because what happens next shifts the war entirely. As the battle raged outside the walls, Theon Greyjoy, stationed to guard Bran, noticed something off. The gates on the east side weren't manned. Guards missing, too quiet. He followed the silence and found Maester Luwin stabbed through the throat outside the rookery. The gates were opening. Cersei was inside, but she didn't expect Arya Stark needle struck. First, right through the thigh of one of her guards. Then Arya vanished into the smoke like a ghost, screaming through the halls. They're inside! They're inside! Bran was asleep when it happened, dreaming of a three-eyed crow, of a tree with faces, of a door in the snow that whispered his name. He woke to fire and the sound of his sister screaming his name. Theon ran for him, not out of duty, not even out of loyalty, but because for once he saw the boy, not the hostage, not the pawn. A boy, helpless, alone, and he swore not today. He carried Bran out through the kitchens as Cersei's men swept the halls. Arya carved through another soldier's calf in the pantry. They ducked, hid, escaped through the broken kennels. Cersei found Bran's bed empty and screamed. Now here's the part no one saw coming. Ned returned before the outer walls fell, rode through, his own gates soaked in blood, dragging Tywin's banner behind him. He had captured Jaime Lannister on the field, cut down 6 of his knights, threw him from his horse, spared his life only long enough to use him, and when he saw the smoke rising from his home, he didn't hesitate. He found Cersei in the Godswood. She stood beneath the weirwood, red leaves drifting around her, staring at the heart tree like it was mocking her. She turned slowly as he entered. Her dress was torn, her hands bloodied. "You should have killed me in King's Landing," she said. "I still might," Ned replied. "You think you've won?" He stepped closer. "You lost everything," she smiled. "Not sweet. Not broken, wild, no," she whispered. "Who did?" Then she lunged. The dagger came fast from her sleeve. She aimed for his throat, but Ned Stark, grieving father, broken lord, twice betrayed, was done hesitating. He caught her wrist, twisted, snapped bone. She screamed, and he ended it. One strike, just like her son had ordered once, but this time it was justice, not cruelty. Outside the fires were dying. The snow was falling clean again. Joffrey limped through the gates, face caked with blood, eyes burning with something none of them had ever seen in him before. Not madness, not fear, resolve. He looked at Ned, at Jon, at Robb, then at the men who stared back like he might still become something more than a monster. "I'm not going back," he said. "You never can," Ned replied. And that was the truth, because from that day forward, the North no longer had just wolves in its pack. It had a lion too, but while they fought each other, the dead kept walking. The dead kept walking. The wall fell at dawn, not with the thunder of war horns or the roar of dragonfire, but with the sickening silence of death given form. Ice cracked, stone groaned, and then a long, shattering scream echoed across the frozen wilderness as the ancient wall, 700 feet high, 3 centuries old, crumbled like chalk. It wasn't a siege. It wasn't a battle, it was an end, at Castle Black. Jon Snow felt it first. The ground trembled beneath his boots. Then came the howls of dying horses. Then the wind turned cold, not northern cold, otherworldly cold. Maester Aemon tried to stand, but his breath misted thick, and his frail bones collapsed to the floor before he could reach the door. Sam was screaming something. Ghost growled low and deep, and Jon, sword already drawn, ran to the top of the wall just in time to see the impossible. The Night King, mounted on a dead elk with blue glowing antlers, leading a wave of whites through the breach. Jon didn't blink, didn't scream, didn't even breathe. He just turned and yelled one word down the stairs. "Run! Okay, stop! Right here, because now the world shifts again. Everything we thought mattered. Crowns, names, vengeance. Honor means nothing in the face of what's coming. But back in Winterfell, they don't know it yet. They're too busy burying the queen. Cersei's pyre burned high for 2 days, not out of mourning, out of necessity. Her body had already begun to rot from the cold inside Winterfell's crypts, and Ned Stark would not give the undead any more weapons. He stood over her fire alone. Sansa watched from a distance. Arya didn't come. Joffrey didn't either, because in their minds she was already dead long before her body hit the flames. But that same night, Bran had another dream, the three-eyed crow again. The tree with faces, the army of the dead. He woke screaming, shaking, eyes rolled back. Jon returned 3 days later, half-frozen, blood-stained, eyes hollow, and behind him, only 20 rangers survived the breach. Castle Black was lost. Eastwatch gone. The Night's Watch broken. I saw him, Jon said to Ned that night, voice low and cracking. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He raised them with a glance. They moved like water. They don't want peace. They don't want land. They want us. All of us. Ned said nothing, just looked at the maps, at the empty space between the north and the wall. They'll reach us in weeks, Jon continued. Maybe less. Then we'll send word to the south, Robb said. The realm has to unite, but Jon shook his head. They won't believe us. And even if they do, they won't care. Not until their castles are under snow. And Joffrey, he stood by the fire saying nothing. He didn't ask what the Night King looked like. He didn't ask if they were fast. He just said, we'll die screaming if we don't stand together. And for once, no one argued with him, but the problem was bigger than unity. The North didn't have the numbers, too many dead in the Lannister skirmishes. Too many wounded, too many empty halls. So Ned did the unthinkable. He wrote to Daenerys Targaryen, yes, you heard that right, the same girl Viserys had tried to use. The same child Robert wanted dead. The same bloodline that killed Rickard and Brandon Stark. But she had dragons. And right now, dragons were the only things the dead still feared. He sent Jon to find her. South across the snows. Arya went too, no one could track better. And Joffrey unbelievably asked to go with them. I've worn a crown. I've sat a throne. If she's who they say she is, maybe I can speak to her in a language she understands. Ned stared at him a long time, finally nodded. And so the three of them, Jon, Arya, and Joffrey, left Winterfell. Sansa stayed behind, with Robb, with Bran, with the weight of what was coming. Now let's shift for a second, because in King's Landing, something was brewing. Renly Baratheon had declared himself king. The Tyrells backed him. Stannis hated them both. The realm was fracturing again, and no one was listening to the warnings from the north except one Tyrion Lannister. He sat in the Hand's Tower, reading Ned Stark's letter over and over. Then he laughed, but not because it was funny, because it was exactly the kind of horror his sister would have ignored, exactly the kind of threat his father would deny, and exactly the kind of war no army could win. So he did something bold. He went to Renly, sat at his table, drank his wine and said, if you don't march north, you won't live to march anywhere else. Renly laughed in his face, but Loras didn't, because that night, the first snowfall in a century touched King's Landing, and it didn't melt. Meanwhile, Jon's group reached White Harbor, preparing for ships that might take them south. But the port was abandoned. Frozen corpses littered the docks, blue eyes still glowing. They fought. Arya stabbed through 3 whites before Jon could even shout. Joffrey pulled a young girl from a sinking boat, face bloodied, blade red. He didn't hesitate, didn't think, he just saved her. And after the battle, as the girl cried into his chest, he whispered, I was like them once, but you don't have to be. Arya saw it, Jon saw it. The prince was becoming a man, not a king, not a tyrant, just a man, but time was running out. The snow was following them. The dead were spreading like rot under flesh. Cities falling without warning. Villages vanishing in the night. And Daenerys? She had finally arrived in Westeros, at Dragonstone with fire in her heart and vengeance on her breath. Now here's the final punch of this part. As Jon stepped into Dragonstone's throne room, Arya at his side, Joffrey just behind, the dragons screamed, not at Jon, not at Arya, at Joffrey. They remembered, they smelled him, the blood of the Kingslayer, of the Mad Queen, of everything Targaryens had burned to break the wheel, and they roared, and from the shadows, Daenerys Targaryen stepped forward, face like fire, eyes like judgment. You, she said, staring directly at Joffrey. I should burn you where you stand. And he didn't flinch, he didn't bow, he said calmly, then do it. But after you hear what's coming for all of us, after you hear what's coming for all of us. Daenerys didn't move, neither did Drogon. The dragon loomed behind her, wings half unfurled, lips curled back over rows of glistening teeth. His breath steamed in the cold, and even fire seemed hesitant in his chest. The moment hung there, deadly and frozen, one heartbeat away from carnage. But Joffrey didn't flinch, he didn't bow, didn't beg. He met Daenerys Targaryen's gaze like a man already dead, and in that stare she didn't see the boy king who screamed for heads on spikes. She saw something worse. She saw herself. The rage. The loneliness. The hunger to be more than the blood they came from. Her child forged in fire, but terrified of the ashes they left behind. Arya stepped forward slowly. "Your Grace," she said carefully, "we came to warn you. Not fight you. The dead are coming. Winterfell will fall if we don't stop it." Daenerys didn't look at her. "Why bring him?" Jon stepped up. "Because he's seen what happens when men think blood makes them better. He was the worst of us, and now he might be the one who can save us. By doing what?" Daenerys asked coldly. "By proving people can change," Jon said. Joffrey swallowed hard. "Or by dying for it." She paused. Just for a second, a crack in the fire. Then she turned and walked toward the throne. "You'll stay the night," she said, "but I decide tomorrow." Behind her, Drogon growled, but didn't burn him. That was something. Back at Winterfell, the snow was knee-deep. Bran had stopped speaking. He didn't eat. Didn't sleep. Just sat by the heart tree, eyes blank, whispering to things only he could see. When Sansa tried to move him, he said only one thing: "They're almost here." Robb watched the northern ridges every day. No sign of Jon, no word from Arya. Ravens stopped coming. The sky was too thick, too dark, and the wind, it whispered. At night, soldiers heard voices outside the walls. Some swore they saw old friends walking past the gates. Dead friends, friends buried last year. And Robb? He didn't sleep. He had grey wind now, and the direwolf wouldn't stop growling. Maester Luwin had once said fear keeps men sharp, but fear this thick dulled everything, until one day Bran screamed, loud, shattering, and the words that left his mouth cracked through Winterfell like thunder. "The wall is gone. The dead ride south. The Night King is here." Sansa didn't ask questions. She just rang the bells. Every soul in Winterfell gathered in the courtyard, and Robb Stark climbed the battlements, sword in hand, cloak flapping in the storm, and shouted above the wind, "They come for us tonight. No lies, no hope, just the truth." And still not one man walked away. Now listen closely, because what happens next will tear your heart out. Back in Dragonstone, Daenerys stood alone in the war room, candles flickering over the painted table. Jon entered quietly. "You should sleep," he said. She shook her head. "I had a vision," she whispered. "Me standing in snow, alone, the throne behind me, burnt and ash in my hands." Jon looked at her. Maybe it wasn't snow. Maybe it was ash. She turned to him, eyes fierce. "Then I need to make sure it's not yours." He smiled, soft, sad. Too late for that. Outside, the dragons cried, not in anger but fear. And when they launched into the sky, wings pounding against the clouds, the cold didn't fight them, because even the storm was running. Daenerys mounted Drogon. Jon climbed on Rhaegal. Joffrey stood on the docks, shaking. "Do I go?" he asked Arya. She looked at him hard. "Only if you want to die a Stark." He nodded and climbed aboard. The dragons flew north, straight into the night. And that night, the world broke open. The Night King stood at the edge of the woods near Winterfell, eyes like shattered stars. His army filled the horizon. A sea of bones and ice wights, giants, dead direwolves, children, mothers, kings, all silent, all waiting. And then, one step forward, and the dead ran. The battle wasn't glorious, it wasn't clean, it was slaughter. Thousands fell in minutes. Robb fought like a wolf unleashed. Sansa stayed in the crypts, steel in her spine, blade at her belt. Bran never moved from the godswood. Arya danced between shadows, needles singing, and then the dragons came. Drogon and Rhaegal descended in fire and fury, turning the snow to steam. Daenerys screamed from above, rain and blood in her hair. Jon leapt from the sky like a ghost, Longclaw shining, and Joffrey. Joffrey ran headfirst into the flames. He fought beside Robb. He saved a boy from a giant. He cut down a White Walker and screamed when the blade shattered. He stood over Arya's body when she fell. Chest pierced, and he didn't run, he didn't break. He lifted her, bleeding, breathing, and carried her back, and that is when the Night King found him, not Jon, not Dany, not Bran, Joffrey. The Boy who should have been king. The boy who never should have lived, and the knight. King raised a hand. Joffrey looked him in the eye. I was a monster once, he whispered. But I die a Stark. And the Night King thrust a spear of ice straight toward him, but it never landed. Bran's eyes opened, every raven screamed, and the weirwood tree bled and suddenly light from within the crypts from the ewe. Roots from Bran himself, the old magic, the first men, the children, the wolves, and... The Night King screamed as Winterfell erupted in ancient flame. The dead burned, the ground shook, and the last wall of ice broke in half. When it ended, the sun was rising. Arya lived, barely. Jon stood over Bran, who was barely breathing. Daenerys collapsed beside Drogon, exhausted. And Joffrey, he was still. Robb knelt beside him. No words, but Joffrey opened his eyes, bloody, bruised, alive. I didn't scream, he whispered. Robb nodded. No, you didn't, and that? That was how the monster was buried, and the man was born. Now here's your final beat. The North rebuilt. Slowly. Jon refused any crown. Daenerys left, flying east with her dragons, seeking a world where no thrones remained. Sansa ruled the North. Bran lived in shadow, eyes never quite his own, and Joffrey. He never took a title. He stayed in Winterfell, helped rebuild, taught children to hold swords, carved his lion from the weirwood, prayed, fought, stayed. When he died years later, the old men said only one thing. He wasn't the boy who killed Ned Stark, he was the man who saved his children. And that changed everything. Like the story. Hit that like if you never thought you'd root for Joffrey. Never thought you'd root for Joffrey.